Hello and welcome to another Daily Muppet. In today's video, I'm going to clarify with information I have received what the INEOS offer for Manchester United that is being reported is really all about, and if it is something that can be supported or not. I'm also going to talk about some of the things that have gone on in the dressing room in recent weeks, as well as who United are looking at and what positions they're prioritizing ahead of next summer. So let's get into it. All right, so it's been a little while since I've done one of these daily videos. Obviously, doing the weekly podcast with Phil, which I recommend, where we cover everything that we're hearing at the time. But outside of the window, it's hard for me doing daily ones when there hasn't been an enormous amount of news. A lot of it has been just overblown speculation and things like that. But I don't, as you know, if you watch my videos, I try to make these ones have some substance. And have there be a purpose for doing the video, not just to hear myself talk. It's not really my forte. It's not really what I love about it. I always want to be able to provide good information and have that be the focus. So when you watch one of these videos, it's meaningful, it provides you with good information, and I think that makes it a lot more valuable than daily content or something like that from the perspective of what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to pass along. So that being said, let's get into some of the stuff with INEOS, because there's a lot happening and I have a lot of information myself. Obviously, some weeks ago, I put out alongside, Phil and some other, Phil really, and we were the two people. We talk a lot. We also share a lot of information to ensure that we're, putting things through properly. But I received information that the Rain Group and Glazers and INEOS had been back in talks, had been discussing things like voting rights, all of that, and that these discussions were ongoing that would lead to potentially a new offer for the club. Some people tried to deny this information and say that it wasn't true, but as I said in a previous video, unless your source is one of the three partners at INEOS, I really do not recommend challenging the information that I share on this front. It has proven time and time again to be correct, and I know why, and it will be correct. It's probably as good as I can get in terms of a source when it comes to certain things. So I don't share things from that perspective lightly. I don't share it without being absolutely certain. I don't share it because I want it to be true. There's been a lot of information going around that people are just running away with that has absolutely no basis in fact. Yesterday, there was enormous numbers of people taking victory laps about Qatar. Meanwhile, quite the opposite was what is occurring in the real world. And I continue to advise you to stop listening to people who are simply telling you what you want to hear. Not only did a Bloomberg story come out that stated that Jim Ratcliffe's new offer was in the lead, was being considered by the Glazers, and has got things closer than ever to a deal being completed and would be taken to a board meeting. But David Orenstein in his weekly Q&A for The Athletic also said the exact same a few hours earlier, that as opposed to what is being said on social media, it is not moving in Sheikh Jassim's direction, but in fact it is far more likely to be the INEOS minority offer. This is not something that I'm talking about because, there's some agenda about wanting it to be true. If, and I said this publicly as well, if INEOS offer was specifically and only for 25% of the club as a minority investment, it would not be something that I would support. And since we've gotten some news of that in conjunction with those talks that I was hearing about, I've been attempting to clarify and ascertain the truth behind it as to whether that is the case, in which case it would be something I would not support, would be vehemently opposed to, and would certainly tell people as well that it is not something that we should get behind or hopefully we cannot allow to occur. And so I've been looking into trying to find that out because I want to know the truth. One of the things that people have not been able to accept on this entire process with the United sale, and it's partially why they're taking sides and things like that. And I said this way back in April, when Jim Ratcliffe's first offer came up that said, I'm going to do a buy 51% and leave a percentage. And people were like, oh my God, leaving some of the Glazers in, all of that. The thing I said was, you're not kind of facing reality here. There's a world where the Glazers don't sell at all. And if they wanted to take that Qatari offer that was on the table, they would have taken it. They wouldn't need to have waited. And that was back in April and May. They wouldn't have needed other offers. They could have just accepted it. And there's a world where they don't want to sell. And if they're not going to accept that offer because they all can't agree, then the alternative is nothing unless someone comes up with a creative solution. And now here we are 6 months later. That's the problem. We've had this problem all along. We've seen it. That has become a reality. The Glazers have not sold. The Glazers have not sold anything to anybody. And so a creative solution becomes necessary because it seems fairly obvious. If you just look at it logically, why would they accept an offer today that they hadn't accepted in June? They wouldn't. It makes no sense. So obviously, from a Qatari standpoint, they could raise the offer. If they raise the offer to $5.5 billion, $6 billion valuation, they probably get the deal done. They have not given an indication of doing so yet. I don't know if they will. I don't think they will personally. There's been semi-conflicting reports on that. We'll have to see. But it's very, just logically, point being, someone had to get creative because they weren't going to accept the offers that were on the table. And that's where this was all kind of coming from. It's why I said, don't take sides on this. Just observe the situation and look at it and say, okay, we all want the Glazers out of control. That is the most important thing, that they do not in the end control Manchester United. How did we make that happen? They don't have to sell. If Jim Ratcliffe's bid isn't on the table, that doesn't mean they're taking the Qatari one. It might mean they wait 2 years, like one report insinuated, for other buyers. And there's truth in that. I'm not saying that that report is totally accurate, but there is truth that the Glazers feel there may be more buyers coming forward in the future. 2 years down the road, another few years down the road, maybe people who want to come in more as partners and form different partnership groups and things like that. None of that, there's no guarantee that that is good news. So there has been a lot of confusion on this, and I think a lot of misunderstanding, and it's led to a lot of bias. And unfortunately, you know, it's meant that people are falling into believing things that aren't true and believing things that are, you know, not correct. I've always warned, don't listen to people who tell you what you want to hear. I know that a lot of people who watch this aren't necessarily, you know, INEOS in, and I frankly, I'm not anybody in. I want the Glazers to get out of control, and then I would judge whoever comes in based on what they do. And just be careful of listening to people who are telling you what you want to hear. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of people who have spoken complete and utter bullshit from day one on this that are still misleading people today and pretending, you know, to have things. And that's been the case forever with insider information and things like that. But where were they in knowing that the INEOS and the Glazers had started talking again a month ago when they were saying they were completely out of the race? Where were they in knowing that this new offer was being presented? They don't know. Every day, every deadline has come and passed on all of this information these people have tried to present. So let's talk about the INEOS offer. Let me end my rambling and soapbox on this. But, you know, I want these things to be meaningful, and I want people to understand the perspective overall. Let me get my note on this because I have a long note from a long conversation. All right. So I'm not going to, there's some things I cannot say, but in general, the most important bit for this entire thing is this one point. INEOS want to take 100% of the club. INEOS want 100%. In the end, they want to reach 100%. And I'm not talking 69%, just the Glazer shares. In the long term, they want to own 100% of the club and take it off of the market. That has always been the case. That has always been the eventual goal with this, and that has not changed as of now. They were not prepared to pay an extreme premium for Class A shares that essentially have no value. And so, of course, their idea would have been to buy the Glazers out in whole and then buy Class A shares over time in taking the club private. And that doesn't really matter. That has never been a hugely important thing from the perspective of management, but just more why they'd want to do that in the long term. They feel they have broad agreement on the price with the Glazers now for about 5 months, and that it's a good significant chunk higher than what the Qatari bid was offering. They first reapproached Glazers and Rain over a creative way of working out a deal a few weeks back, when I'm talking about earlier what I was talking about. And they left from a lot of those discussions feeling confident that something could come together on this that might work, but they knew they had to get creative. They've been in regular and direct contact pretty constantly for the last few weeks, including in-person discussions over the last weekend. And they feel at the moment that there's some kind of proposal that they have that will work for the Glazers and circumvent any potential legal challenges and things like that. There's been at times some hesitancy that I heard about a few days ago that perhaps this wouldn't work logistically or legally, but they've been able to, in the time, essentially confirm that it will and that it is a viable offer. So at this moment in time, INEOS feel they have a viable offer on the table that is acceptable and meets the valuation of the Glazers. It is a 25% initial offer. However, it absolutely does, as far as I understand entirely from the people I speak with, it absolutely does include route to not just majority control, but 100% takeover of over the club. In terms of timeline, there's multiple options at different stages. So in terms of taking over 100%, maybe 3 to 6 years. They don't need 100% to have full control of the club, and I'm talking 100%, not 69%. But majority control could come a lot sooner than that, and the options would be able to be taken up at different times. There's a couple of, and that's the most important factor in this, is that this would be done with entirely the idea that the end goal, and with stipulated options in place that would allow for INEOS to complete a full takeover over time. The other very important factor in this is that there would be stipulations. This is what INEOS are proposing. There would be stipulations in the bid regarding control of certain funds and certain aspects of the club, including how investment would work. What I mean by this is if INEOS were to decide to say, hey, let's put money into the club to clear the debts, they would have control over those funds, and ensure that they were used to clear the debts. If they were to put money in for, say, hey, we want to invest in the club that will allow to expand that FFP loss kind of range, you have this issue where you can only lose a certain amount because the owners haven't invested. Well, if they were to put money in to make that a bigger loss range, that money would be spent on things that affect FFP. The only things that affect FFP are football, wages, transfer fees, etc., right? And so it would be allowed to be used for that. It would be, they would be able to make capital investments in the club and have control over those capital investments. There's likely other things they'd have control of, but that's the only thing that I have confirmation of that I know for sure is specifically in there. I'm not going to be able to get every detail, but I know that is in there, and that is very important as well. As far as the people I speak to know entirely, and they should know this, given they've known practically everything else, this is simply an alternative route to the challenges that were being faced with the other offer. It's just a different structure, but it is with the same goal. It may take a little more time, but the end result is expected to be the same in the long term. That is what INEOS want. That is what they're proposing. And so I'm not going to tell people whether to love it or hate it or support it or anything like that. But from everything I understand, this was very important for me to clarify. This is not 25% and nothing else happens. Okay? They're not intending to put an offer in that would just give them some sort of share that they could then flip later for a profit. Jim Ratcliffe gave himself a good example of this. He said he made an offer to Barcelona where he would give them 2 to 3 billion, renew their stadium, and then would at that point, and then he would at that point take over about half of it, and then would not be able to pass those along to anybody else. So you would have it at that point in time and just that. And that would be the end of it. And so that is similar in a way to what we're talking about here. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that. Just had to close my door. It would be an offer wherein, you can't take those shares and then flip it. He would have to keep them. He could not sell them for a profit or anything like that. So the goal would be to keep buying up more, and that would be the reason for investing, is to become a majority owner, and be the, eventually take over the club in its entirety. So that is INEOS's intention, very, very specifically stated to me. That's what they're trying to do. That's what they're trying to accomplish, and that's what I think will be it is what this offer is, as far as I've understood. So now one can look at that and say, do they like it? Do they not like it? But all I implore you to look at is that there's not two scenarios here. It's not 25% and then 50 and then 75 and it takes 2 years, or 100% Qatar. Those are not the only two scenarios on the table. There's 4 scenarios on the table. There's a bid like this from Jim Ratcliffe where he will likely get control in the next year to 2 years, and then eventually 100% of the club. And in the meantime, would be able to make capital investment in the club and control those funds. Or there's the Qatari bid for 100%, or there's nothing. And we wait 2 to 3 years, and maybe Glazers go into a partnership with somebody, or there is potentially, let's say, an Elliott Group type minority investment instead. And so there's a lot of different routes. It's not one or the other. So in deciding, can I support this? Is this something okay? One has to take that into consideration. Sorry, 1 second. Sorry, work stuff just getting in the way. So I'll try to wrap this up now. So what comes next is that, as far as INEOS's perspective, they're going to be able to present that this is an acceptable offer that the board can now take and go talk about. That is what was stated in Bloomberg. Here you go, Friday video, you get to see the guy mowing the lawn. That this is an offer that they can now bring forward. It is an acceptable offer. It is a valid offer. And they believe that because getting to the point where the board are going to essentially vote on this type of offer, they've gotten a lot of positive signals. They think it's a good offer. They think it's something that fits all the criteria and is an acceptable one, and are pretty optimistic about it. In terms of timeline, this type of offer would not take that long. You would still have to go through owners and directors tests as a part of it, but you're talking about a few weeks, probably at most, maybe a month for something like this, and then they would be in place. And then obviously a longer timeline for eventual stages of the takeover, but these would be preset dates. And that, I don't know how much of that has to be public or would be public. So we'll see. That's what with this. However, if it's not accepted, either way, it's going to push something to happen here, because if they don't then go to the Qatari bid, and I don't see why they would, unless they add to it, then I think we're in for long delays and a reopening of the bidding if this doesn't come through, and Qatar doesn't raise their offer. So I guess we're going to have to see on that as the alternatives. So now, given all of that being under discussion, I don't want to do too much more on it, because I don't want to get into then speculating. I wanted to give the information that I could give and let people make their minds up about what they want. I will be on the Real Reds Talk, guys. I'll be on their channel again in a couple of hours to talk live, so I'm happy to answer questions and talk about things in more detail at that point in time. If someone wants to join, and if you want to do that, I recommend it. They're really nice guys, and I love going on their channel and chatting with them. They're very, very, very nice guys, local to Manchester, and yeah, good people. In terms of the locker room, there's obviously been a whole lot of stuff. One of the things I put out was with regards to this Jadon Sancho thing, that he felt that, there was issues with Anthony, there was a blow up with them, all of that, and that other players as well feel that, potentially there's some favoritism and things like that going on. The thing people are not understanding is these are facts. Doesn't mean I agree with him, but they're facts. These are things that people think. These are things that are going on. And in that way, they do have to be dealt with. There are other things that have happened, and like I've said, I don't like going into a ton of detail on it because a lot of them are not that unusual and can get blown out of proportion, but someone does have to think about it and look at it and resolve it. A huge part of modern day management is getting along with players and man management. It just is. People have to be real about that because that is the case. It is not like it used to be. There's a lot, the scenarios are different. And I don't want to put names on and things like that because people blame people. People automatically assume the worst. They automatically assume it's like Rashford and Maguire and stuff like that. And it's there's pointless putting names on it because I don't like to target people because people will take it the wrong way. Those players have, in many cases, none of them have really done anything wrong. But there are some issues in the locker room that Erik ten Hag has to sort out. It's not a mutiny. It's not like everybody hates him and is angry and they're not following him. Nothing like that. It also doesn't mean that players agree with the way that Sancho has conducted himself as a professional. Most, if not all of them, have maintained a very high level of professionalism, despite having disagreements, and some of them have become more vocal with Ten Hag in the last couple of weeks and simply voicing their concerns more directly so that they can be sorted out. Sometimes those concerns being voiced can be taken to an outside observer as like bad. If you observe from the outside the way that sometimes how groups communicate with each other, how families communicate with each other, you might think things are bad when they're not. People get passionate, people get emotional, people get upset. That doesn't mean it's bad. It doesn't mean it's beyond saving. It means sometimes that people care enough to talk about certain things and get through them and work through them. And that's been, I believe, some of what's going on. So I'm curious to see if coming back from the international break, I know for a fact that some very important players in the locker room have voiced specific concerns to Ten Hag, and the goal is to resolve them, because that's going to get everybody back allied, back moving the same direction. So I'm curious to see if it improves after the international break. And I think you'd be able to tell based on the way that they play, the way that they perform, the energy levels, if these things have been resolved or if they did not lead to resolution. So I think we will find out. Finally, in terms of targets, you've seen a lot of confirmation of some of the things that I've been talking about center backs being targeted on both sides, including my news that I shared way back in June about Gonzalo Inacio. Did I say that all right? God, attempting to get these things right, and then I second guess myself. But Inacio from Portugal as a potential center back. They are looking at a right center back and a left center back. I still think a right center back is going to be the priority, but they are looking at a left center back in the case that they need one. And frankly, if it weren't for Glazernomics, they'd likely need both. That is going to be a key area that they're looking at. They're strongly looking at Casemiro replacements. As I mentioned before about Ezequiel Palacios, they've made offers to multiple midfielders with the idea that Casemiro may leave to Saudi. And they still think that is a possibility, but we're cognizant even this summer of the long-term need to replace him and wanting to get his replacement in sooner. It is not going to be Amrabat. Amrabat is a squad player if they end up signing him for the long term, and they will need somebody else in there to replace Casemiro for the long haul. And they're still looking at that. That is a huge priority. They are also very strongly looking at wingers. As I shared a while back, they have been looking at offloading Jadon Sancho, and that in January he may leave on loan. That has now been confirmed by a lot of people. And I don't think that they're going to spend big in January, to be clear. I think at best a loan. But I would focus on those three positions as a start. Center back, defensive midfielder, and right wing. Those would be the three major positions, or right wing but slightly flexible, but those would be the major positions of priority that they are watching a lot of players on moving in through next year. And there's going to be a lot of names still to come and go, and so I will keep adding to the lists as we move forward. Okay, that's what I've got. Thank you for watching this video. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn notifications on, and I will see you in the next one.